Hi everyone, and welcome back to Mingo's Corner on YouTube, where we are working on a rag rug. This is, I think, my third video for this project, and let me bring you up to speed about what's happened since we talked last time. I have obviously warped my loom. This is a 7.5 dent Heddle. This is 8/4 Maysville rug warp. And it's just threaded for plain weave. This is just up and down weaving at this point. What is going to be different is what's going to happen down here at the line where the fabric is being made, and that is called your fell line, F-E-L-L. So what is happening here is I am putting in some rows of my 8/4 rug warp, which is now becoming weft, and I intend to weave about 2 inches of just plain weave, but I'm weaving plain weave a little differently, and I am using my supplemental beater. This is an Ashford supplemental beater. You could be using another tool, you could be using a different kind of beater. That's not what's important, but I am beating in these picks after each weft pick and after each gentle beat with the Heddle. We really can't beat our warp as tightly as this just using the rigid Heddle. Let me go ahead and demonstrate. So this is normal weaving. I'm in a down shed. I am pulling through my pick. I am leaving my angle here. And then I am going to bring my Heddle in and I'm going to beat. But that's about as tight as I can reasonably beat my weft in with the Heddle. It just can't get down that close because our Heddle reeds are fixed. These Heddles themselves are a fixed width. There's got to be room for those. And, you know, it's not designed to do this kind of beating. So this is where the supplemental beater is going to come in. I'm going to come over here to the side that I came in on, and I'm going to just start beating across. If this looks like it's slightly unevenly beat in the middle here, it probably is. That will tighten up some on the wet finishing. I'm looking to get pretty much full coverage, but I'm also, as usual, you draw your warp together as best as you can. As we weave, you keep doing the supplemental beat, previous rows will start to compact even more. So the fact that there might be like a little space after my first row or my most recent row isn't gonna worry me as much unless that space doesn't disappear after 3 or 4 picks. The other thing I did do before I got started here is I did do a hem stitch. A lot of people like to hem stitch by taking their projects to the sewing machine and doing a zigzag. In this case though, the purpose of my hem was to make a solid line here that I could beat against. If you've ever done tapestry weaving, you will know that, you know, one of the first things you do is a header. This is much like that. In fact, it looks very much like that. And you have to do a knot across the bottom of your warp to keep your warp from just sliding off your weft from sliding off, because we do pack the weft in when we do tapestry as well. So, and the other reason that I did the hem stitch too is because I am going to turn this under and make it into a folded hem. I haven't decided if I'm going to turn it under once and sew it to itself, or turn it under twice and sew it to the back of my rug. That has yet to be determined. So let's do a little bit more of the weaving on this header here that I've got going. Header, hem, whatever you want to call it. It's obviously not what the rug is gonna do. It's gonna take me, I don't know, probably 40 or 50 picks just to get about 2 inches of this hem woven. So see, I'm pulling as tightly as I want to bring my weft pick down as close as I can. And now I'm gonna come over here to the side in which I entered the shed, and here's why. If there's any slack, I want it to be available to that edge first, and then if I need to, I can always, lift up. I do stop though after each pick, and before I do the next one, I give it a little tug to make sure that I don't have any draw in. A couple people who have woven rag rugs on their multi-shaft looms have told me, you could use a temple. And I'm like, yeah, I could use a temple, but for no more than I'm gonna be doing this, I that seems like an expense that I don't need. So let me demonstrate bubbling. So we've got our shed open. I would close the shed, take my finger, and make bubbles, basically. That's what we do in tapestry. And that would work here too. Rather than using your heddle to beat with, your rigid heddle to beat with, you could do that. And as you can see, what happens is as you bubble and you start beating in, some of that excess weft kind of works its way out. And then when I get down here, I've got a couple little bloops, so I'm gonna just keep patting that in. There we go. Honestly, I think I prefer the tap in with the rigid heddle and then a beat and just use my usual weaver's angle. But that is another option. If it's something you're comfortable with, or if you're just not sure, if you feel like you're drawing in too tightly, you could certainly try the bubbling method and see if that helps resolve. I'm also pulling a little bit out here on my outer warp thread just to help keep that from drawing in too far. And then again, since I went in from the right, this is where my edge is. To keep this from drawing in too quickly, too fast, too hard, I'm gonna start beating on that side and then just come along. So you can see why we don't want a soft warp. And so that is what I'll be doing for the next hour is getting this hem in. And as you see, probably the best place to see whether we're getting full coverage or not is here where I replaced my warp threads in the center with brown instead of the blue, because I wanted to make sure I had enough blue left over to do this, right? To have some weft for either end, and I didn't want to run out. I've got a little bit of a bump right there, so you can, take your beater and just kind of rearrange, like do a little bit of an extra bump there. Over time, it is going to even itself out some. And these first few ones down here that are a little bit loose and open, those are going to tighten up when we wet finish the project. So this is how I'm using the supplemental beater and my regular rigid heddle to beat for my hems. And one thing to keep in mind with your supplemental beater is, again, you could use a fork, you could use a pick, you could hair pick, you could use a lot of things. The beauty of the supplemental beater, and this isn't a sales pitch, I'm just trying to help those of us who want to be ergonomic, is that it is kind of weighted. I'm holding it back here at the back, and I'm not like beating in with my arms like this. I'm simply kind of smacking it down. It's a very subtle finger movement. Even you could do it with your wrist, but I'm finding it's a lot easier if I kind of hold it like this and then just beat down with it. And the fact that the wood is a little weighty, it's not super heavy. There's nothing ridiculously heavy about this end versus this end, but it's got some weight to it. It's got some bulk to it. So you're not doing anything with your arm, your shoulder, your wrist to do the kind of beating we need to do for this project that's untoward. It's just kind of helpful to know that, yes, it's a tool. Yes, it's one I don't use very often, but it does have its place. There are other kinds of tapestry beaters that you could use. You might have one if you have something like a Murex or a Chloe or a Saffron Loom or something, and you want to try using that, you can. Now, it might work just fine for this lighter weight weft, which is your 8/4 cotton, but when you get to the fabric, that's where this will really come into its own, because you can get a little bit more aggressive with it and not have to worry about damaging your warp, damaging your arm, and getting that thicker weft packed in when we get to the shirts and the flannels and the denim and all the things, right? So I'll just continue this and I'll meet you back here when I'm at the point where I'm ready to start weaving with my shirt fabrics. Okay, everyone, so I'm back and we are ready now to start weaving with the fabric. Couple things to note. In future, I will not be putting in a 2-inch hem like this. Had an awful lot of trouble with my warp tension. It didn't want to even out. It's been hard to beat in evenly just because this is so fine. It's going to be fine for this project, but I think in future, the 3/4 inch that I've done in the past If I want to then fold that under and sew it to the back of my project, I could do that just as easily, but I wouldn't go this route, and I certainly would not consider weaving an entire rug at this density like this. So anyway, lesson learned. It's all experimentation at this point. And so I am ready to go ahead and start weaving with my fabric. Now, I don't know if this is the fabric I prepped in previous videos. And just a note that I am wrapping it in a figure 8 around the outside of my shuttle. Not everyone winds their shuttle this way. I was taught to do that early on in the game, and I always wind my shuttles like this no matter what I'm putting on them. But with the fabric, it certainly helps because it does kind of keep the bulk down. So let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and put this heddle back in the shed that it was in when I made my last pick, so I can tuck my end back in. I'm not gonna bother to beat it with the heddle because at this point that wouldn't do me much good anyway. And I'm just gonna beat this in. And I'm also going to make sure that I'm not unduly pulling this edge work thread in as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with our first pick of the fabric. And much like I do, or like we would normally do when we were working with yarn, I am going to take an edge, or take a piece out of the edge and tuck it back in. Sometimes I try to fold this. I was actually trying to do it right now. It's not really wanting to work, so life goes on. We're just going to beat it like this. It will crunch up. And I'm going to leave a tab sticking out. So yeah, it's going to be a little thicker here on the edge, but that's going to be okay. And we're going to crunch this down some, as you can see. It wants to bounce back out, and this is where the supplemental beater is really going to come in handy, because we're just going to start beating this. And you can see that I can get a whole lot more of the fabric crunched down into my warp by beating it with the supplemental beater. Let's see if there's anything I can do here with this. All right, we're going to leave this hanging out along with that tail. And also remember that as you keep using the supplemental beater, you will continue to beat down previous rows as well. So, you know, there's a little bit of a gap right here that I can see from this first bit, and I'm not going to worry about that because I know that as I keep beating, that gap is going to eventually sort of disappear. All right. Now the fabric is going to try to fold, and I'm kind of working at getting a pinched crease. Just remember that your warp is so thick here on the edge, or your weft is so thick here on the edge, sorry, that you are going to have a little, it's going to jump out. It's not going to be neat and even on the edges as it would be if you were using yarn, or if we had continued with something the same weight as our hem. And that's okay. I sometimes kind of come in and double check that I haven't pulled that outer warp thread too far out of alignment. And then I'm just going to keep beating here. Now again, you're going to see there's a little bit of a line that's forming. Hopefully you can see that on the camera. There's a little bit of a line forming right here where we haven't beat this in very tightly. That should, over time, start to go away as we continue to beat further weft picks in. This one's gotten tighter, this one's going to be loose. The most recent pick is going to have a little gap left between it and your the rest of your fabric that you're creating. Obviously with just this little bit on my shuttle, it isn't staying wrapped. That's okay, we'll get it all worked out. Longer pieces will be a little less ungainly. But this is not a fast process. Weaving with fabric, it's fast in the sense that you will cover ground fairly quickly, right? At 4 picks per inch, it can't take you too long to weave very many inches, correct? Because it's just going quickly in that way. But what it isn't also doing is it's not quick to make the individual picks. So again, I'm checking my edges here to make sure that I'm not pulling in my warp too far on the right or left. And I'm just going to beat. All I'm doing is pushing it down as far as I can comfortably do it. I'm not putting strain on my heddle because it really is a lot to push. So you want to, and you can see why we're using rug warp, right? Because I'm not carefully choosing where to place my beater. And while this is I think it's an 8 picks per inch or ends per inch beater, my Heddle is a 7.5, or maybe it's designed for the 7.5. But at any rate, it's occasionally snagging or hitting a yarn instead of just beating, and that's okay. So you can see now some of the gap that was between the first pick and the second pick has filled in, but now we have a gap between the second pick and the third pick. And this is just going to continue. This is the nature of weaving with a super heavy weft yarn like this fabric, is that it's going to, when you start trying to create something that's closer to a weft dominant fabric. So what is a weft dominant fabric? Well, normally our plain weaves, and this is a plain weave, are evenly, you see evenly the warp and the weft. You see the weft threads just about as much as you see the warp threads. So it's called balanced weave because we see both the warp and the weft in a pretty even balance. When you start doing things where you're adding supplemental beading, you're taking the warp or weft and putting it in super tightly like we're trying to do here, you're creating something that's more weft dominant. Now, it won't be weft faced in the same way that, like, this is weft faced here. I've packed it in so tightly that I can't really hardly see. You can just barely see a little brown right here. This is weft dominant, and that the weft is obviously considerably heavier than the warp. So it's going to dominate what you see. Yes, we will see some color of the warp because obviously we're seeing some brown here, but mostly what we're going to see is the weft fabrics as they come through. So, all right. I am going to come through right now because I feel like once we've gotten started here, there's room for a little bit of manual manipulation of some of these weft picks just to kind of help get things to start to snug in as tightly as I want them to. So I'm just using my fingernails to kind of mush these up just a little bit. Once I get a rhythm, once the warp is used to having this thicker weft in it instead of our hem, I think we're going to be in a better space. We don't have to worry about this as much. I don't remember having to do this necessarily before, but I also didn't put this massive hem in as I did the last time. And I think that that has created a little bit more tension down here at the bottom that is not allowing me to get my weft in as tightly as I want it to at this point. Okay. And it might have beaten down as tightly as I want it. The other thing you can do is take your beater and just stick it in. And like I said, this last pick is not going to get as tight. It just simply can't. We haven't gotten any other tension put on it. So it only has room to go out. It has the room to go out, and it's going to take that room until we get another pick in there. Okay. But if you don't have fingernails, this is another alternative. You could also use a comb or something if you have it, but we're going to go with this and see how this does. So let's go for a downshed. Looks like this is going to be the last pick of this blue. So I got about 5 picks from that length of that fabric on this particular warp. And that's about what I expected. I didn't expect it to be a whole lot. I knew I didn't have a ton of it to work with. Okay, let's see here. All right, we'll beat this in first with the Heddle. I'm not going to worry about my end quite yet because I really want to do some beading here. I'm also going to check my tension. That's going to help. That may have been a big part of my problem. So one thing about working with, there are looms out there designed for weaving rugs, and they are called rug looms, and they are usually designed like a multi-shaft loom in that they have either a lift or a lower, and they only lift or lower. They're not manipulated like a rigid Heddle, and they have extraordinarily high tension. So anywhere here that I see the warp is trying to bunch up on itself, I'm just coming in and making sure I have manually spaced it back out kind of how I want it to be so I don't start creating a problem. And that's just the vagaries of the fabric. And I'm also using, like I said, the end of the beater, the handle, and using kind of the weight of the beater itself to do most of the work for me. All right, so let's see, that was a downshed. So again, just like it when you were working with regular fibers, I'm just gonna tuck this in, several picks. Do not just tuck it in one or two. On rare occasions when I've done this with fabric before and only tucked it in one or two, it actually came out during the wet finishing process. If that were to happen, let's say that's all you got. You've got just enough to just barely tuck it back in, and you don't want to pull the whole pick out and not have that last pick, full pick in. If it popped out, I had some that came out with like a little flag like this. I just folded it over after it was wet finished and then decided which was the front and the back. And then I use a sewing machine, or you could use a needle and thread and just hand tack it to itself, and that should hold it in place. Okay, I'm gonna wind forward here. And other than the fact that we're using the supplemental beater, I'm treating this fabric just like I treat any other fabric as far as I'm gonna wind on. I did find when I worked on these projects with the fabric that I did need to wind forward. There is a sweet spot. You don't want to be beating so close to your heddle with the supplemental beater that you're hitting the heddle or hitting the beater on the heddle. So that's a problem. And also you want to make sure that your tension stays as tight as you can keep it, because again, those commercial, those rug looms that I was mentioning before have super high tension on them. We can't attain that super high tension, so we can only do the best we can here. And so, you know, you just want to keep your tension as tuned up as high as reasonable. Obviously, my heddle goes up and down with a little effort, but it's not creaking or anything crazy. So I think that we've got as good a tension as I'm going to be able to get there. So my next my next weft fabric is this light flannel, and I actually cut this one narrower. So this is a 3/4 inch cut when I put this together. And let's see if that doesn't bead in. It's a little bit softer material in general than the shirting I was using. That first fabric was a shirt, and that fabric was just kind of stiff, which isn't a bad thing, but it may be part of why it's not going to bead in very well. If I were to use more of that shirt in future and I hadn't cut the shirt all to bits, which I have, I probably would cut it a little narrower next time. Okay, so again, we're going to use the heddle just to kind of get it down where we want it. And then I'm going to take my supplemental beater and beat it in. And this is the project. This is all there is going forward. This is beating in a little bit tighter, and as you can see now, we're starting to lose some of these gaps down here. If there's a place that feels like it's still kind of gapping, get at it, get after it. Just get in there and just keep beating, and eventually you'll see those spaces will start to tighten up. Like right here, I'm seeing a few small gaps down at the bottom. Those first few picks were just not playing nicely, and again, I think that was my hem decision. So I have not broken a warp thread doing this, so something to keep in mind. I suspect there is a way to do it, but I have yet to do it myself, so not something to be too terribly worried about. Let's see. And that was an upshed, so let's tuck our end in now. Pull it through. And I'm just going to leave these tails out, whatever the length is here that they're going to be out, that I've double tucked in, because I'm going to wet finish it. If they were to pull in at all during the wet finishing process, I want them to have some extra to pull in with. I mean, that's what creates the little flags, is when they pull in too far and then they kind of stick out. So I'm going to let them hang out during the wet finish process, and then when I'm done with my rug and I'm about ready to put it down on the floor, then I'll come through with a pair of sharp scissors and just cut it carefully close to the surface of the rug. All right, I am gonna try in places where I get a hem like that that's just kind of insisting on showing up right side out. I am gonna try to open it up, but the odds of it staying like that are probably about 0. But if you can, and it did stay that way, it just kind of evens out where that bulk of that seam, those 2 ends of the seam that I use to make my fabric strips, ends up. And again, you know, this thing does most of the work for me. I'm not doing this, I'm not using my wrist hard, I'm using my fingers, and it's kind of almost like a flicking motion back and forth, like a really fast pendulum, say. And one thing I've noticed as I've used my rag rugs is occasionally I get these little fuzzies that are going to come up as you're using them. It's just eventually the fabric will stop fraying, I believe. I think it's just the fibers need time to settle in, settle down. Like this one's already fraying here just a little bit. And it's okay. It's gonna, you know, those things are gonna work their way out. All right. And they're just gonna become part of the project. You might, you know, if there's a really long one, you might wanna trim it down. You are looking for kind of an even line across here, but you are not probably gonna achieve a perfect straight line. The vagaries of the fabric are going to, you know, work at you. Checking my tension. Yep, it's still good. Okay, so here is my measuring tape that I mentioned that I use, and I'm gonna go ahead and set this up. I know I wanna weave my fabric from this point to the end of the fabric weaving. I want it to be about 42 inches. When I get to about 9.5, 10 inches, I'm gonna be pretty close to a quarter of the way through my weaving. So I'm gonna wanna take a look and see where I am as far as my number, how many different colors I've used, how much is left, where am I in the amount of yarn that I have prepped to use for this project. Because if I'm only a third of the way through my yarn, but I'm a quarter way through if I'm a third of the way through my weft yarns I've prepped, and I'm a quarter way through my project, then I'm gonna need more of my weft yarn in the middle somewhere. I'm gonna have to add something or add some additional fiber. If I am at a quarter way through and I'm only like a quarter of the way through the length and I've only used maybe a 1/6 of my prepared shirts, then I'm gonna have to take some stripes out or make some adjustments someplace so that I have a fully symmetrical project at the end. And you know, you don't have to even have symmetry. If you just want to play with the colors, throw them in there however you want to, that is perfectly fine as well. But I'm looking for symmetry because the person for who is gonna have to look at this rug every day kind of would prefer it to be symmetrical. So I'm gonna aim for symmetry and hope for the best. I am occasionally gonna stop and just stretch out here to make sure that I'm not getting too much draw in, but things are looking pretty good. Okay, everyone, so I'm back to talk a little bit about some of the choices I've made and how things are going. I made the decision early on, which was a correct one, to cut the denim strips at a 1/2 inch width instead of 3/4 or a 1 inch as I have done on some of my other pieces. And to be honest, that was a good decision. I'm also finding though that it's very, 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 very hard to beat this in with even just the supplemental beater. I can get it kind of where I want it. The goal is to not have massive gaps in between your different picks, which is why we're using the supplemental beater to begin with. But I'm also finding that this denim is just kind of wants to spring back out of the pick as I'm working. And what I'm doing here too, by the way, is I'm just adjusting. Occasionally when there's a join in my fabric strips, I'm getting little like warp issues. So I'm just adjusting those. Those will kind of even out in the wash as well. So I'm not too terribly worried about that. But I have had to go back in and do some extra things with the denim. So I thought it might be helpful to show you a few things I've done. The other thing I'm questioning at this point, and of course we're committed, this is a commitment that I've already made. I did not find it as hard to beat in the supplemental wefts when I was working on a 5 dent heddle as opposed to a 7.5. Now, what I won't know for a very long time, of course, is whether one or the other is going to last longer. These are not super thick rugs either way you look at it. I mean, the fabric here is not uber thick. If you want a thick rug, you're gonna have to start with thick, heavy fabric, and none of these fabrics are cut to be super thick. So I don't know. If I were going to use denim in a future project and I knew I was going to use denim, I might go with the 5 dent reed as opposed to the 7.5. I did some research and it seems like both of these 2 sizes are often offered or suggested as good ones. And people who have done far more of this on a rigid heddle than I have said they do both and that they find both are fine. The other thing is I'm finding too, and I didn't mention this in the beginning, and I'm not sure how much of it I demonstrated, but I'm actually kind of helping it fold as it goes into the warp. So, or the weft, I mean, as weft, words. So what I mean is, okay, here I'm putzing around with a little bit of not so much worried about the turns. The turns sort of seem to figure themselves out, but I'm kind of helping it sort of curl into itself as I lay my pieces. And this is not just the denim, I did it on all of them. Just to kind of help the ends sort of become inside as opposed to outside. The denim is also shedding like a beast. Now, I don't know if you can see this or not from where you are. It's really hard to get the entire width of my loom into the camera, so the camera is at an interesting angle. It's already opened up down here just by moving the heddle up and down. I've gotten a larger gap here than I had before I started. Now we've added the gap for the denim. And unlike other picks where if I keep beating, eventually the earlier ones kind of beat themselves in, I'm finding the denim is less likely to do that as well. So, okay, this is going kind of okay. I'm having to I'm not using my wrist. I'm still using the supplemental beater as it was intended, but I'm kind of doing whatever I can to actually beat with a little bit more force. So what I did come up with in this case, like right here now, we're 3 picks down and I've got a gap that I'm not happy with. And those gaps might tighten up some, but they might not. So this was I don't know if this is a hair pick. I don't know what this is. This came with a little tapestry beater, but this is not, my hair pick is much flimsier than this. This is maybe a comb of some kind. So what I've been doing is when I'm starting to get these gaps open up, I'm sticking a couple of the tines down in between my warp threads, and I'm just kind of helping shimmy that down just a little bit tighter so that as I keep beating, I don't have these gaps forming that I can't get to any longer. Is it ideal? I don't know. Is it gonna work as a rug? Absolutely. So I have had good luck with a meat serving fork. You can see it's got wide tines. It's got a little bit of weight. I flip it over so that I'm, actually this is working pretty well. So I'm flicking it down towards me. So again, much like the supplemental beater, oh, that actually works pretty nice with this denim. Let's see. So let's try the denim with that. Now again, I'm getting some spaces to open up. So I'm gonna have to, keep an eye on those. Once you get a couple, 2 or 3 past and they've kind of beaten in, they'll tend to stay there with the denim. I am finding that. So, and you can see this denim is just shedding everywhere. I just swept up a pile from underneath my loom a few minutes ago. It was like, wow. But that's okay. I do find that the actual rugs don't tend to shed quite so badly. I think once they're wet finished, we have a better, it's just kind of, it takes some of it out. Okay, so the nice thing about the fork is it works really nicely as a additional push on these previous. I actually like this better than the beading tool that came with a little tapestry loom I got. The little black might have been a hair pick. So let's just beat this one in. Okay, it's beating to the last pick pretty well, but I'm gonna have to get that last pick to seat better. It's just, there's too much gap. So again, this is not a fast project. And actually, I'm just finding the denim to be a lot more persnickety to work with than my cotton shirting fabrics were. And because you're working with, in this case, I'm working with, I should say, recycled fibers, basically, shirts that have been worn, have been washed, that sort of thing. I'm not gonna have to worry too much about what's gonna happen with the fabric shrinking up. It probably won't shrink. So most of the change you're gonna have in your finished project is gonna be from the warp, which is, of course, new warp, has never been washed and is going to do its own kind of shrinking. I would wash this on warm water in the washing machine, and I would run it, ran mine through the dryer, and that does kind of do the final finishing on the touching up of any shrinkage it's going to have. Yeah. I'm actually a fan of the fork for the denim. I don't think I would necessarily choose this for everything, but I'm thinking for this denim, it's kind of, for some reason, it's doing a slightly better job. Now it does look fantastic once it's beat in and it's had a chance to settle. So, and of course, some tightening happens of just taking projects off the loom. A good experiment when you're weaving with something that you weave with more often, like 8-2 cotton or something with a towel, is to measure your picks per inch at this point while it's under tension on your loom. Then measure it again when you take it off your loom, but before you wet finish it. And you'll notice that things will tighten up. And all too frequently, we're given the number of picks per inch of the finished project, but sometimes that doesn't really tell us what we're gonna see on our looms. You may not get that picks per inch while it's under tension, but it is good to know that, you know, that picks per inch while it's under tension while you're weaving is going to differ. It's like a lot of times when I'm weaving with 8-2 cotton and doubled on a 10 dent, like we often do with rigid Heddle looms, while it's under tension on the loom, I'm gonna get something like 8 picks per inch, and the pattern may say you're supposed to get 12. Well, okay, I take it off the loom and I get 10 maybe, or 9 to 10, and then I wet finish it and I get 11 to 12. So I get to 12 eventually. I just may not get there while I'm doing the actual weaving. All right, everyone, I almost got finished with my first round of picks using the heavier flannel. This particular flannel I cut at 3/4 of an inch. In hindsight, perhaps I would have maybe chosen to go for a 1/2 inch, but what's done is done. We're gonna live with the 3/4. It's not particularly bad at a 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch. It's just, it's a lot thicker than I had kind of expected it to. I thought it would pack in better than it is. And again, this is not, this is just cotton flannel, but it's a heavier weight flannel than some of the other flannels I have chosen to use here. And what I've chosen to do on this one, partially because it just seems to be working, is rather than beat with my rigid Heddle reed, I am just beating it in. I'm giving it the angle, and then I'm just beating it in with the supplemental beater because it's because it's thicker and because it's a brushed, I mean, flannel is a brushed cotton. Flannel is 100% cotton fabric that's been brushed in a specific way to bring up the nap or to bring up the fibers. It can be used interchangeably with quilting cottons, but again, it tends to be a little bit thicker. And then this one was also thicker because I think the yarns used to make the flannel were a little thicker than some others that I've had. But I'm finding that it was a little bit tricky to beat in, but nothing like the cotton denim that I was using before. So I did decide though to start beating it in, and I should have stopped sooner because this is all I have left. So there is an unfortunate thing happening here though that we can talk about. I'm ready to flip my fabric around my outer edge, and I have a seam, and I don't really want to beat a seam into that space. So for lack of having any other way to handle it, I'm going to cut an angle off on that. And then this one's just going to tuck back in, and it's going to be on the short side. Let's see. This was an up shed. So there we go. Tuck that in. Maybe not as far as I would like to have tucked that in, but we're going to live with it. It's going to be fine. It's more than a couple of picks in, and once I start beading, other things will help to anchor that into place. I went back to my supplemental beater, but honestly, I found that the meat fork was not a bad solution. Again, I'm using it with the pointing tines. I'm kind of using that as the side that I'm beading on, and it seems like it is almost as good. So I'm kind of pleased to find that there is a common household tool. Even if you don't have one, this is something you could probably go pick up at a thrift shop or someplace else or borrow from someone. But it's something you can get relatively inexpensively. I want to say, you can probably go to the grocery store or to the Walmart or to a thrift store and get one of these for $10 or less. These are closer to $30. So if that's a problem, or if it's not something you think you want to invest in at this point, this isn't a bad substitute. I'm really been pretty pleased with it.